This video is sponsored by LegalZoom. More on LegalZoom at the end of the video. Hey Wisecrack, Jared again. Now, I don't know about you, but every time a new Christopher Nolan movie comes out, I happily shell out my hard-earned $25 for a sweet IMAX 70mm experience. There are few directors today that can meld thought-provoking philosophy with big-budget spectacle. But Nolan, well, he makes it look as easy as spinning a top. Now, instead of focusing on one particular Nolan film, we're gonna take a step back and look at his entire filmography, because throughout all 10 of Nolan's movies, certain themes keep coming back. In fact, there's so much to discuss, we've pulled the ultimate Hollywood move. Today's Christopher Nolan video will be the first of 3 on the director. Now don't worry, we're not pulling a Hobbit and extending a children's book into a 7-hour trilogy. Think of this instead, if you will, as our Lord of the Rings. There's just so much great stuff to say about Nolan that we have to make 3 videos in order to do his work justice. So sit back in your recliner chair and welcome to this epic Wisecrack IMAX 70mm presentation of the philosophy of Christopher Nolan Part 1. And of course, spoilers ahead. Christopher Nolan's films can be broken down into 3 distinct phases: the self, society, and the universe. The first phase we'll discuss, the self, includes Nolan's early work, following Memento, Insomnia, and The Prestige, as well as Inception. These films question the nature of personhood. Can we ever truly know someone else? Can we know ourselves? Can our own thoughts be trusted? Hell, what even is a person? To better understand how these questions develop in Nolan's work, we're first going to have to learn a little something about what French philosopher Paul Ricoeur calls the hermeneutics of suspicion, or as the cool kids say, HOS. Hermeneutics studies how people interpret text. Think of how a biblical verse can be interpreted any number of ways. Christ's crucifixion could be thought of as an allegorical, moral, or even literal story. Hermeneutics looks at all these different interpretations, focusing on the methodologies people use to justify their interpretations. And it's not just biblical text. Legal, literary, philosophical, pretty much any text you can think of falls within hermeneutics. Heck, I mean, Wisecrack is basically just one giant site dedicated to hermeneutics. All we do is interpret text, film, television, literature, video games, you name it. But Ricoeur questions these so-called interpretations, identifying a group of outside-the-box philosophers committed to drawing out less visible and flattering truths. Ricoeur called this group the School of Suspicion, which sort of sounds like an erotic French thriller starring Charlotte Rampling and Ludivine Sagnier, but unfortunately it's just 3 dudes with facial hair: Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and Sigmund Freud. According to Ricoeur, these figures, and the lineage they inspired, were committed to unmasking the lies and illusions of consciousness. They circumvented self-evident meanings in text, focusing on what wasn't said and the contradictions within, all to decode a true, disguised meaning. So while religious stories like Christ's resurrection may seem to be about how man achieves salvation, for the School of Suspicion, these stories disguised a hidden meaning. Marx stated that the true purpose of religious narratives were to make the misery of life more endurable. Nietzsche unmasked religion as the refuge for the weak, giving purpose to the mentally fragile. And Freud thought that religion was an illusion that substituted one's wish for a father with God. Now, yes, hermeneutics of suspicion typically only applies to text, but it can be used more broadly to refer to any so-called interpretation we hold as self-evident. And what's more self-evident than, well, ourselves? Yes, you, YouTube viewer, watching this video with your 8 tabs open and fidget spinner in hand. What we drink, watch, wear, think, believe, all inform how we interpret ourselves and others. Much like the HOS, Nolan questions the conclusions that come from standard interpretations. He confounds our assumed knowledge, challenging our presuppositions to reveal deeper, disguised truths about who the hell we really are. Nolan's films are always about that suspicious relation between our subjective reality and the idea of an objective reality. Now, this might sound like idealism to the philosophically inclined among you, but we're not arguing that Nolan dismisses any external reality, but rather he embraces a critical disposition toward the accepted notions of the self. Take Christopher Nolan's debut, Following. The black and white indie follows Billy, a struggling writer who obsessively watches people from afar to get inspiration for his novel. One day, he follows a well-dressed thief named Cobb, no, not that one, after he robbed a house. Cobb quickly notices Billy watching, but instead of running away or attacking the stalker, he invites Billy to join in on his robberies.
Are you interested now?
See, Cobb is far less interested in stealing precious items than in figuring out the lives of people through their possessions.
Breaking in, entering someone's life. finding out who they really are.
Both Cobb and Billy interpret and construct their own images of people. Billy by following strangers around, and Cobb by breaking into people's homes and rifling through their belongings. But Nolan immediately questions if these conclusions hold any merit, suggesting you can't rely on appearances and possessions to define a person. As Cobb himself says when burglarizing a house,
Take it away. Show them what they had.
For Cobb, violating a person's property forces his victims to reevaluate themselves. When the possessions people hold dear are taken away or altered, it, in effect, causes them to question their identity. Nolan also questions people's reliance on appearances. Cobb urges Billy to cut his hair and don his same suits, which Billy immediately does because he wants to be just like his mentor. But this is all a setup. The blonde woman is working with Cobb to frame Billy, the earlier break-in and makeover just a long con on the poor writer. Billy's own presuppositions of Cobb are revealed to be false, a far more dastardly intent lurking beneath his friendly smile and mentorship.
You don't look like a burglar. Sounds like a compliment.
Nolan's suspicion towards using possessions and appearance to define others carries over to his next feature, Memento. The film's protagonist Leonard suffers from anterograde amnesia and relies on a series of possessions, photographs, notes, and tattoos to remind himself of who the people around him are and whether they can be trusted. Leonard puts complete faith in these items, depending on them exclusively to guide his actions. He trusts Natalie because his notes tell him to.
She will help you out of pity.
He kills Teddy because, again, his notes tell him to.
He is the one. Kill him.
He believes the car parked outside is his because he has a photograph that tells him so.
My car. This is your car.
Oh, you're in a playful mood.
But of course, these mementos aren't nearly as reliable as Leonard believes.
You don't even know my name.
Teddy.
That's because you read it off a picture.
Nolan, in true HOS fashion, creates drama by throwing suspicion toward the validity of text. In this case, photographs, notes, and tattoos. How can we trust something we read if the source itself is questionable? Truth is, Natalie can't be trusted. That car parked out front actually doesn't belong to Leonard. And Teddy, well, he's not the guy Leonard should kill at all. Leonard may say,
Well, I go on facts, not recommendations, but thank you.
But if the truths these facts are based on are incorrect, then what use are they? Nolan constantly draws a distinction between Leonard's subjective reality and the idea of objective truth.
And what we were trying to do is essentially present an idea of the tension between our subjective view of the world, the subjective way in which we have to experience life, and then our faith in an objective reality beyond that.
In Leonard's subjective view, he's a husband avenging the rape and murder of his wife after a break-in. But as the film reveals, his wife actually survived this initial attack. It was Leonard who accidentally killed his wife, forgetting he had already given her her insulin shot. Moreover, Leonard actually already caught and murdered his wife's rapist over a year ago. He uses text to trick himself into believing that this idealized revenge mission still exists.
You don't want the truth. You make up your own truth, like your police file. It was complete when I gave it to you. Who took out the 12 pages?
You, probably.
No, it wasn't me. See, it was you.
Why would I do that?
To create a puzzle you could never solve?
Leonard conditions himself to believe in the lies he's created to the point where even his own long-term memories are fabricated. He substitutes the story of Sammy Jenkins for his own so he doesn't have to live with the guilt of accidentally murdering his wife. Nolan here extends the hermeneutics of suspicion from simple text, Leonard's unreliable notes, to Leonard himself, his own false memories.
Do I lie to myself to be happy? In your case, Teddy, yes, I will.
This suspicion continues into Nolan's third feature, Insomnia, where in Memento, Leonard is an unreliable narrator who's unable to discern reality from his own fiction. Insomnia's chief protagonist, Detective Will Dormer, seems to be the opposite. He's reliable, intelligent, and perceptive. But if Memento focused on a broken man attempting to rebuild his sense of self, Insomnia takes the counter approach, showing how even the most rock-solid guy, like, say, an Al Pacino, can crumble into self-doubt with just a little push.
See, madness, as you know, is like gravity. All it takes is a little push.
Hold up, Ledger, we'll get to you in part 2. Anyway, after Will mistakenly shoots his partner in the fog, the guilt of the event triggers intense psychological confusion and, well, insomnia. He hallucinates his dead partner, rooms seem to distort around Will, and everyday noises become blisteringly irritating. Later, Will hallucinates that he actually did see his partner in the fog, and that he deliberately shot him. Unlike Memento, Insomnia provides no clear explanation about what is true. Did Will deliberately shoot his partner, or was it just an accident? The answer? Who knows? Nolan yet again extends the hermeneutics of suspicion, now questioning reality itself. He implies it's much more complicated than just accepting either pure objectivity or subjective idealism. Perhaps we can't ever be sure of the world around us. By the end of Insomnia, Will doesn't even know if he deliberately shot his partner or not.
Did you mean to shoot Hap?
I don't know anymore.
The Prestige is pretty much Nolan's greatest hits, as he tackles all the hermeneutics of suspicion from his earlier work. The film is told through a series of journals, many of which are fake, once again casting suspicion on good old text. All of the film's magicians use disguises to mask their tricks. The great Chung-Lin Soo pretends to be a cripple. Alfred Borden wears disguises to mask that he has a twin. And both Alfred and his frenemy Robert Angier repeatedly pretend to be audience members. Like in Following and Memento, appearances can't be trusted, and the self is constantly put into doubt. Even Alfred's own wife doesn't know his secret, confused that her husband could be so loving one day and so cold the next, unaware of the existence of her husband's twin.
I love you.
Not today.
What?
Well, some days it's not true, and today you don't mean it.
I love you.
See, today it's true.
Nolan uses magic yet again to question subjective reality versus the idea of objective truth. From the audience's subjective point of view, the bird really does disappear and then reappear. But in reality, there were actually two twin birds, one dead beneath the table, the other reappearing in the magician's hand.
You're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled.
Just as Memento's Leonard prefers to live in the illusion of his manipulated subjective reality, the audience too prefers illusion over truth. They don't want to know how Robert literally duplicates himself each night, murdering his double in a water tank beneath the stage. They'd much rather live under the lie that Robert disappears and then suddenly reappears on the opposite end of the theater.
Well, if people actually believe the things I did on stage, they wouldn't clap, they'd scream. I mean.
As a filmmaker, Nolan views himself like these magicians. He plays with illusion and misdirection to keep the audience guessing. We know that we're watching a movie, a projection on a screen, an illusion. But we don't really want to know this truth, so we revel in the imaginary world that Nolan has crafted. This is what Nolan ultimately wants, to affect the audience through trickery. For him, the truth deep down is that we prefer the imaginary over reality.
The audience knows the truth. The world is simple, miserable, solid all the way through. But if you could fool them, even for a second, then you can make them wonder. And then you got to see something very special.
Nolan's suspicion towards reality climaxes in Inception, a film where every single thing is put into doubt. That guy who looks like Tom Berenger? Well, that's actually Tom Hardy. Can't trust your eyes. That thought you just had? It's actually been implanted by Leonardo DiCaprio. Can't trust yourself. Your children waiting to play outside? Actually, it's all a dream. Maybe. Can't trust anything. Inception's protagonist, dream thief Cobb, no not that one, can barely discern his reality from a dream, to the point where it doesn't even matter. In Cobb's supposed reality, he's on the run chased by goons with guns through Byzantine pathways. In Cobb's supposed dream, he's, well, still on the run chased by goons with guns through Byzantine pathways.
Chased around the globe by anonymous corporations and police forces, where the projections persecute the dreamer. Admit it, you don't believe in one reality anymore.
Nolan deliberately draws this parallel to showcase how muddled the two are. Put simply, there is no difference between dream and reality because subjectively, Cobb can't tell the difference. Such is the fate for Cobb's wife, Maul. She believes that her reality is still a dream, and to wake up, she must kill herself.
She was possessed by an idea. This
one very simple idea that changed everything. That our world wasn't real. That she needed to wake up to come back to reality.
But what if Maud's actually right? What if Cobb has been dreaming the whole time?
What if you're wrong? What if I'm what's real?
No definitive answer is ever given, which is exactly Nolan's point. In the end, only the question remains. That last indelible image of that goddamn spinning top, spinning but just slightly wavering, provides no definitive answer as to if Cobb is dreaming or awake, only further proving that, in the end, there is no truth, no reality, only the suspicion thereof. Well, at least until we get to part 3. Through each of Nolan's early films, he casts doubt on appearances, on possessions, on others, on ourselves, on our thoughts, and finally, on reality. But if you can't trust anybody else, and you can't trust yourself, and holy shit, you can't even trust the reality surrounding you, then how the hell does society function? How can people come together and form a stable working unit given the foundational bedrock is so wonky? This is the question Nolan explores through his Dark Knight trilogy, which we'll explore in the next part of our own Wisecrack Nolan trilogy. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace. Nolan is a master at making you question your sanity, but there's no reason your legal needs should make you feel that way. LegalZoom is the smart way to handle all your legal essentials, and they're giving Wisecrack fans 15% off their purchase. Whether you're setting up a new business or planning family matters, they'll help you breeze through the process like it's nothing. LegalZoom eliminates the guesswork of trying to track down an attorney you trust, calculating how much your legal work will cost, and having to drag yourself to a lawyer's office. LegalZoom works with a network of independent attorneys to help you with all sorts of projects: the formation of your company, wills and trusts, trademarks and patents, contracts, and more. When we decided to do Wisecrack full-time, the most important step was making sure our business was set up right. Separating personal stuff from the company and navigating all the intricacies of state and local laws can be a huge pain, but LegalZoom offers the services and resources to make sure you get it done right. Head over to LegalZoom.com/Wisecrack at the link in the description below, and bring all your questions about starting a business, planning a family, or copyright and trademark stuff. You'll get 15% off your purchase just for being a fan of what we do. Thanks to LegalZoom for sponsoring this video. That's all for now, Wisecrack. Don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 2 million subscribers, and ring that bell so you don't miss a thing. Peace, guys.